Welcome, wanderer. Tonight, the Firefly leads us to a snow-laden cottage in the Highlands, where an old covenant between winter and warmth hangs by the thinnest of threads. Here, a shepherd named Maren keeps a vigil that others have forgotten, waiting for the Frost Fae who comes with the first snow, carrying the balance of seasons in its fading hands. This is a story of remembrance, of small rituals that hold back the endless cold, and of how tradition, like a carefully tended garden, can bloom again, even from a single seed. The first snow always came on the same night. Maren had marked it in her grandmother's ledger for 17 winters now, ever since she'd taken over the cottage and the 12 goats that graze the highland meadow. The entry was always brief. First snow. Fae comes at dawn. Bowl filled. This year, she sat by the window, with her knitting needles clicking softly, watching the flakes spiral down through the darkness. The wool was thick between her fingers, dyed the deep grey blue of winter twilight, with madder root and woad she'd gathered herself. She was making a shawl, though for whom she couldn't say. There was no one left in the valley who remembered what shawls like this meant. No one who would recognize the pattern her grandmother had taught her. The one that looked like frost on glass, like the delicate fingers of ice that crept across the cottage windows each December. The village below had changed. Where once there had been 15 families who kept the old traditions, now there were only 3 cottages that still burned yew logs on the winter solstice. The others had moved away, or worse, stayed and forgotten. They heated their homes with coal now, burned their fields in spring instead of letting them rest. And when Maren mentioned the Frost Fae in the baker's shop, the younger women had laughed. Old superstitions, they'd called it, quaint. Maren had said nothing. She'd bought her bread and walked home through the snow with her basket, the loaves still warm against her hip. Let them laugh. She knew what she knew. Every winter, for longer than anyone could remember, the Frost Fae had come, and every winter, someone had to be ready. She set down her knitting as the first light touched the eastern sky, that peculiar blue-grey that came before true dawn. The goats would need milking soon. She banked the fire, wrapped herself in her heavy cloak, and stepped out into the cold. The world was transformed. Snow had buried the garden fence and drifted against the stone wall that separated her land from the wild moor beyond. Her breath plumed white in the air as she made her way to the small barn where the goats shuffled and bleated their morning greeting. They were warm bodies in the dimness, their eyes bright and trusting. "Good morning, loves," she murmured, running her hand along Briar's flank, then Thistle's, then Little Wren's. She knew each of them by touch, by temperament. Briar was stubborn but generous with her milk. Thistle was skittish but sweet. Wren was the youngest and still learning. She milked them each in turn, her forehead pressed against their warm sides, her hands moving in the rhythm her grandmother had taught her. The milk sang into the pail, white and steaming in the cold air. When she was done, she poured the richest of it, Briar's milk, always Briar's, into the carved wooden bowl that sat on the shelf by the door. It was old, that bowl, older than her grandmother had been. The wood was smooth as river stones, worn by countless hands and carved around the rim with symbols Maren had never learned to read. She carried it carefully back to the cottage. The sky was lighter now, the sun still hidden behind the mountains, but promising to arrive. She placed the bowl on the flat stone beside her door, the one that was never used for anything else, and stepped back. Then she waited. The Fae always came with the first true light. Maren had seen it happen every year since she was 7 years old, when her grandmother had first brought her out to witness the exchange. She remembered being frightened by the creature's strangeness, its 2 long limbs, its face like carved ice, its eyes that held no color, and every color at once. But her grandmother had squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't be afraid. We need each other. The Fae and us. That's how it's always been." The light crept across the snow. Maren's toes grew numb in her boots. She was about to go inside for another shawl when she saw it. The Frost Fae emerged from the tree line like a breath of winter given form. It was tall, taller than any person, and thin in a way that seemed impossible, as though it were made of icicles and moonlight woven together. Its hair, if it could be called hair, drifted around its shoulders like frost evaporating in reverse, and its skin held the faint blue luminescence of snow in starlight. But something was wrong. Maren's breath caught. The Fae was stumbling. Its movements, usually fluid as water freezing, were jerky and uncertain. As it drew closer, she could see that its edges were blurred, indistinct, as though it were melting even in the deep cold of winter morning. It reached the stone and looked down at the bowl of milk. Its face, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman, showed something Maren had never seen there before. Sorrow. The Fae knelt, its long fingers trembling as they reached for the bowl. It lifted the milk and drank, and Maren watched its form grow slightly more solid, slightly more real, but only slightly. When it lowered the bowl, she could see through its chest to the snow-covered field beyond. "You're fading," Maren whispered. The Fae's eyes met hers. They were like windows into deep winter, into the heart of the coldest night, and yet there was something gentle in them, something almost grateful. The warmth grows thin. Its voice was like wind through bare branches, like the creak of ice on a frozen pond. So few remember, so few give. Maren's throat tightened. "I remember. I'm still here." One cannot sustain what was built by many. The Fae reached out with one translucent hand to touch the carved bowl. Once this valley knew us. Every cottage set out milk. Every hearth burned with remembrance. We were woven into the land, into the turning of seasons. We kept the balance. Snow, but not endless winter. Frost, but not killing ice. We were guardians because we were invited to be, because we were fed. What happens if you fade completely? The Fae was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was fainter. "The land will forget how to wake from winter. The cold will sink deeper each year. The springs will come later, then not at all. We are the covenant between warmth and cold, the promise that winter ends. Without us." It trailed off, looking down at its own disappearing hands. Maren felt something fierce rise in her chest. "Then I'll give more. I'll bring milk every day, not just the first snow. No." The Fae's voice was gentle but firm. The magic is not in abundance, but in keeping faith. What was lost cannot be restored by one person's devotion, no matter how pure. It rose, unsteady, and Maren saw with horror that its feet left no prints in the snow now. You have honored the old ways, that is enough. You have given me this one more dawn. It can't end like this, Maren said, and was surprised to find tears on her cheeks, freezing in the cold. There has to be something. The Fae tilted its head, studying her. Why do you weep for us? Because, Maren struggled to find words. Because my grandmother taught me that everything is connected. The land, the seasons, the things we do every day. It all matters. She said that, tending the goats, keeping the traditions, offering the milk. She said it was like knitting. Each small stitch seems like nothing, but together they make something that keeps out the cold. If we forget, if we let the stitches drop, the whole thing unravels. The Fae finished softly. Yes. The Fae looked at her for a long moment. Then it reached into its chest, into the place where its heart should be, if it had a heart in any way Maren understood, and drew out something small and bright. It was a seed, or maybe a snowflake, or maybe something in between. It glowed with a pale light that hurt to look at directly. This is the last of us, the Fae said, the seed of what we were. Plant it in your garden when the ground thaws. Tend it as you tend your goats with patience and care. And if others come to see what grows, if they ask why you do this strange thing, tell them. Tell them the stories your grandmother told you. Some may laugh, some may listen. And if even a few remember, if even a few begin to offer milk again on the first snow, you'll come back. We never truly leave. We only fade until we're needed again, until we're remembered. The Fae pressed the seed into her palm. It was cold, so cold it burned, but Maren closed her fingers around it. You cannot save us alone, but you can plant the seed of saving. The sun crested the mountains then, spilling gold across the snow-covered valley. In that light, the Frost Fae became translucent, became mist, became memory. Maren blinked and it was gone, leaving only the empty bowl on the stone and the impossible seed in her hand. She stood there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher, watching the way it made the snow sparkle like a field of diamonds. Then she picked up the bowl and went inside. That winter was hard. The cold bit deeper than Maren could remember, and the snow came in waves that buried the village lanes. In the baker's shop, people muttered about climate and change and bad luck. Maren said nothing, but she kept the seeds safe in a small wooden box by her bed, and she kept tending her goats, and she kept knitting by the fire. When spring finally came, late, so late that some of the farmers worried their crops wouldn't have time to grow, Maren planted the seed in her garden. She chose a spot where the morning light fell first, where the earth was richest from years of careful tending. She pressed it into the soil and covered it gently, then watered it with milk mixed with spring water, the way her grandmother had watered her most precious herbs. Nothing happened for weeks. Then one morning, she found a tiny shoot pushing through the earth. It was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Silver green, with leaves that looked like they'd been etched with frost, even in the warmth of late spring. The baker's daughter, delivering bread, saw it when Maren was watering. "What's that?" she asked, curious despite herself. Something old, Maren said. Something I'm trying to bring back. The girl crouched down, studying the strange plant. My gran used to talk about plants like this, said they only grew where magic was. Do you think she was right? The girl was quiet for a moment. Then, can I help you tend it? Something in Maren's chest loosened, like a knot coming undone. I'd like that. The plant grew slowly through the summer. By autumn, it was as tall as Maren's knee, with branches that seemed to hum with quiet cold, even in the warm sunshine. And the baker's daughter kept coming, and sometimes she brought friends, and Maren told them stories. She told them about the Frost Fae and the Old Covenant, about milk in wooden bowls and the balance of seasons. Some of them laughed, but some of them listened. When the first snow came that year, Maren wasn't alone at her door. The baker's daughter was there, and her friend the weaver, and old Thomas from the farm 2 hills over, who said he'd been meaning to return to the old ways, but had thought he was the only one left who cared. They each brought milk in whatever vessels they had, a clay cup, a tin mug, a carved bowl passed down from a great aunt. And they set them out on stones as the sun rose, and they waited. The Frost Fae didn't come that year, but when Maren checked the bowls later, they were empty, licked clean. And the snow that fell that winter was gentler, and the cold was fierce but not killing, and spring came right on time. The plant in Maren's garden had grown tall as a young tree by then, and it bloomed with flowers like crystallized starlight. Under its branches, the ground never quite froze, even in deepest winter. People started coming to see it, to touch its frost-silver bark, to ask Maren about the old stories. And every year after that, more people remembered. More bowls appeared on the first snow. The tradition spread slowly, like roots growing deep. 1 cottage, then 3, then 7, then 12. Maren grew older. Her hair went white, and her hands grew stiff from years of milking and knitting. But she kept tending the garden and the goats and the strange frost tree that had grown from the Fae's last gift. The baker's daughter took over the cottage when Maren's knees grew too weak for the highland path, and she tended everything with the same careful devotion she'd learned. And on the morning of the first snow, 17 years after Maren had planted the seed, the Frost Fae returned. It was stronger now, more solid, though still strange and beautiful and utterly other. It moved from cottage to cottage, drinking from each bowl that had been set out, and there were dozens now, all across the valley. With each drink, it grew brighter, more real. When it came to Maren's cottage, now the baker's daughter's cottage, it paused by the frost tree. The old woman was there, wrapped in blankets by the window, and the Fae turned to her and inclined its head in something that might have been gratitude, or might have been farewell, or might have been both. You planted well, it said, and its voice was stronger than she remembered, like the clear ring of ice breaking on a winter river. The old ways are growing again. Will you stay now? Maren asked. We were always here. You only needed to remember how to see us. The Fae reached out and touched the frost tree, and for a moment Maren could see dozens of them, hundreds maybe, spreading out across the land like a constellation of winter stars. All the Frost Fae who had ever been, who had faded and slept and waited to be called back by small acts of remembrance. The covenant is renewed, the Fae said. Winter will know its bounds. The land will rest and wake in turn. This is the gift of your tending. Maren closed her eyes and smiled. She could feel the balance settling, like the last stitch in a long piece of knitting, the one that made everything whole. "Thank you," she whispered. When she opened her eyes, the Fae was gone. But she could feel its presence in the land now, in the gentle snow falling outside her window, in the warmth of the cottage despite the cold, in the small bright acts of remembrance happening all across the valley. The baker's daughter brought her tea and sat beside her, and together they watched the winter morning unfold, silver and gold and perfect. In the distance, smoke rose from cottage chimneys. On doorsteps throughout the valley, wooden bowls sat empty, waiting to be filled again next year. And in Maren's garden, the frost tree bloomed, keeping the old magic alive. One small kindness, one remembered ritual, one bowl of warm milk at a time. The fire in the hearth burns low, and outside your window, winter deepens in its quiet way. Listen closely. Can you hear the old rhythms still echoing in the world? The patient tending, the small offerings, the gentle magic of remembering what came before. Some threads, once thought broken, are only waiting to be woven again. Rest now, dear wanderer. The firefly will soon return with another tale.